So welcome to the Now and Next of Work, my conversations with some of my favorite thought leaders who are reimagining how, when, and where we work and live today and in the future. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with author, coach, advisor extraordinaire, Whitney Johnson, who not only happens to be one of my favorite thought leaders on the topic of innovation, change, and disruption, she also happens to be one of my very favorite people. So let me tell you a little bit about my fabulous friend. Whitney Johnson is the CEO of the tech-enabled talent development company Disruption Advisors, which is an Inc. 5000 2020 honoree, one of the fastest growing private companies in America. She is Thinkers 50 ranked as one of the top 10 management thinkers in the world in 2021. And in 2020, she was a top voice on LinkedIn, where she has 1.8 million followers. Whitney is in the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and she is an Amazon best-selling author of several books, including Disrupt Yourself and Build an A-Team. And she is a frequent lecturer for Harvard Business Publishing's Corporate Learning Division. She is an former award-winning Wall Street equity analyst, and she is really just one of the most highly sought after and wise advisors and coaches. And she also hosts a great podcast called Disrupt Yourself, and I've been on it, and it really is just, you learn something every time you listen to an episode. One of the reasons I'm excited to have her here today is she has a new book out. It's called Smart Growth: How to Grow Your People to Grow Your Company, which, honestly could not come out at a more perfect time, because we all are continuing to be challenged to grow. So Whitney is the authority. And again, I can't tell you enough how excited I am to have you here, Whitney. Welcome.
Oh, thank you, Cali. That's such a lovely introduction and very thoughtful. I really appreciate it.
Well, I just think you're awesome. So I want to begin where I love starting with anybody who has something so special and fabulous to share that they have just spent so many years diving into and learning. What made you get into this? What is your origin story around becoming interested in the power of the S-curve of learning?
Well, let me share. Let me go back about 15 years ago and to share that. So I worked on Wall Street. I was an equity analyst, as you stated. And one of the things I discovered when I was an equity analyst is that I had been given this assignment to help train my colleagues. In the process of training my colleagues, this was the apex of American Idol. It was Tom Peters had written a brand called You, and I spent all of this time thinking about what brand my colleagues were and did they have momentum or not in their given roles, forensic analyst, industry expert, et cetera. And this is something that I was not getting paid to do. I was getting paid to pick stocks and to look at the momentum of stocks. And I'm spending all of this extra time on how to think about the momentum of people. So that was an interesting thing for me I might be more interested in people momentum than stock momentum. And in fact, our mutual friend, Chrisula Weiniger, said,
Yep.
you're interested in stocks, invested in stocks and people and concepts and dreams. So she kind of came up with that tagline. So data point number one. Data point number two, I'm also working on Wall Street. And I am covering the emerging markets, and I discover that wireless keeps on beating my estimates. So I build these financial models, and every quarter I'm getting my estimates wrong because they're growing faster than I expected. I'm like, what is going on? And I read The Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen, who says, oh, well, they're basically being disrupted because yes, the sound in a cellular phone is not very good, but bad sound's better than no sound. And if you can't afford a phone because you can't get a landline, you don't have access to credit, you're going to take the wireless phone. So I realize, okay, disruptive innovation, but then I have a boss. I go to a boss and say, hey, I'm ready to do something new. My boss says, we like you right where you are.
Yeah.
Oh, disruption can be people too. So within about a year, I disrupt myself. And I've now had data point number two of applying this idea of stocks, management theory, disruption to people. fast forward a few more years, I'm now working with Clayton Christensen. I'm investing with him and his son, and we're using the S curve that was popularized by Everett Rogers 50, 60, 70 years ago to help figure out how quickly an innovation will be adopted, how groups change. Now there's a pattern. I've been looking at people versus stocks. I've been looking at people versus products and disruption. It's not much of a leap for me to say, does this S curve apply to the individual? And the answer was yes. The S curve of learning can help us understand how people learn and how we grow. I'd written an article about it back in the Harvard Business Review in 2012-ish, but had kind of set it aside. I was really focused on disruption because I was working with Clayton and I was thinking disruptive innovation, personal disruption. But one of the things that happened, Cali, is that as I was talking about the ideas in disrupt yourself and build an A team, I had the S curve of learning. It was in both books, but it was a backup singer.
It's funny because it's the thing I pulled out from the first book that I would always refer. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, but precisely that's what happened. I had written it as a backup singer, but then you are saying, no, let's talk about the backup singer.
Yeah.
And so over time, I recognized, oh, I'm talking about disruption, but disruption is the mechanism by which you make progress along the growth curve. So fast forward 2019, and I'm having a conversation with my business partner, Amy Humble, and she says, Whitney, you need to write a book about the S curve. That needs to be the lead singer. It is not the backup singer. That is what people remember. It is this way to think about your growth and the emotional arc of growth. You need to write about that, because up until that time, I had kind of made this intuitive leap of this is what it looks like. And I needed to look at the neuroscience. I needed to look at the psychology. I needed to look at the biology so that I could back up what up until that point was sort of this theory, this hunch. So that's how I got here. And I guess I'll add one more thing. If I look at my life, I care deeply, deeply, deeply about people making progress. And so this is a model that allows people to make progress. And so I just cannot talk about it enough because I want people to grow, and this will help them grow.
And I will say, as somebody who has personally benefited from your passionate desire to see people grow, I can say that is all true. What you said, it really is your guiding passion, and you are so generous. When you see areas where people can grow, you can almost feel you buzzing when you see something that somebody needs. You're like, okay, I'm just going to share this with you. I think this is how you can. And it's true. It really is very true. So now, just quickly, what is the S curve of learning? What are what are the key points along the curve that people need to understand?
Yeah. So as I said, it was popularized by Rogers, and it looked at how groups change. So when I think about the S curve of learning, there are three major parts to it. Whenever you start something new, you are at the base of that S. It's what I call the launch point. And this is that place where it feels like an absolute slog because you don't know what you're doing. You feel discouraged. You feel overwhelmed. You feel impatient. Can't this be over yet? I need to get into the sweet spot. And the reason that it's happening, the experience you're having is that mathematically the growth is there. In fact, it's very, very rapid, but it's not apparent. And one of the metaphors I use in the book are lily pads, where you've got, if you look at a pond of lilies, what's happening early on is there are all these stalks that are underwater. They're going down into the mud and muck, and they're getting roots. But during that early phase, you don't see any pads. You don't see any flowers unfurling. There's just muck and mud. And so that's the launch point of the curve, where this place of growth is happening, but it feels slow. The second part of the curve is, and as you're listening, just think about anything that you want to do, whether it's a new job, new role, a day, your life, you have launch points of your curve. As you put in the effort, you're going to accelerate into this place, this steep, sleek back of the S. And that's the sweet spot. And what's happening there is it's still hard, but it's not too hard. And it's easy, but not too easy. All of your neurons are firing. You feel like you're exactly where you're supposed to be. And so growth is absolutely fast, and it also feels fast. So it's just a fun place to be. Then you get to mastery. where you figure things out, you're really good at what you're doing, but because you're no longer learning, you're no longer enjoying dopamine, which is the chemical messenger of delight, you are bored. And what's happening here is that time feels like it's going by really fast, but growth is very, very slow. So you've got slow and then fast and then slow at the bottom, middle, and top. And that articulates what growth looks like. And the reason it's important is that this simple visual model, which makes it useful because it's simple, it helps you, if you know where you are, if you know what it looks like, then it increases your capacity to grow.
Yep. This is so true. And I can't emphasize enough how much that model can help people understand how to lean into that feeling, all those different phases, and understand where they are and not be frustrated by it, and have a rationale behind how they are feeling, and almost like jump into it and be part of it. And why I think it's so important that you've written this book at this moment, based upon the work that my community does, which is trying to transform the way we work across workplaces and spaces and time and process and all the pace related issues that we have to now face as we face a very transformed workplace. And, truly in March 2020, like it or not, we were all collectively thrown onto a new S curve of learning. We didn't have a choice. And I have to say, we all need to spend a lot more time giving ourselves a lot more credit for how remarkably we as leaders, managers, and employees, you fundamentally adapted the way you worked globally almost overnight. And that's something to really celebrate. But now, as the pandemic restrictions are easing, I'm finding these same leaders, managers, and employees are now faced with a choice to jump to another curve or not. So you can either take the lessons you've learned over the past 2 years, combine it with the things that really should be added back, and go to the new S curve of a more flexible, dynamic way of operating across all different places and spaces. Or you can try to stay where you are, which is the way we've been for the last 2 years. Or there are so many people who are just trying desperately to get back to that old familiar pre-pandemic S curve, where they were at mastery, if not bored, but still they knew it. And I think this is where your S curve, at least for me in my work, has been very helpful to help people understand why at the beginning of the pandemic, that forced jump to the S curve felt so uncomfortable, but we were all in it together.
Yeah.
Now, again, you have a choice. Do you try to stay where we are, which is not working in many cases for organizations, and maybe even not for everybody individually? Do you try desperately to go back, or do you choose now to move on to what's next? What's the difference of being forced to a new S curve versus now having to choose?
Well, in many respects, being forced is easier. It's very discombobulating. As you said, in March 2020, we were on the pre-pandemic S curve, and we were all pushed off to a brand new S curve all at the same time. And that's one of the reasons it was so challenging, is that in a typical organization, you're going to have some people in the sweet spot and some people in mastering. They can go down and do these S curve loops and bring you along. And we were all at base camp all at the same time. We're like, wow, I don't know how to climb this mountain. We don't know how to do this. But like you said, there was a sense of we're all in this together. And I love what you said of, we figured out a lot of really important things. So the difference is that now we get to make a choice, and how we deal with disruption defines us. And so the question now is, all right, I'm on the almost post-pandemic S curve. What do I want to do? Do I want to cling desperately to this old one that is going to become a precipice? It will by definition, because there's no such thing as standing still. Or will I say, I'm going to deal with what's coming next? And the only way I can do that is if I myself am willing to change. Am I willing to disrupt myself? There's a fantastic study that was just done by Egon Zehnder Cali, and they surveyed 1,000 CEOs. 80% of those CEOs strongly agreed, 100% agreed, but 80% strongly agreed that they needed to transform the organization and themselves. So
Mhm.
that's really positive.
Yep.
But prior to the pandemic, Callie, it was only 26%.
Interesting.
So it's changed significantly. I think it's very, very positive. So again, to your question, what is the difference? It's a lot easier if you think about getting pushed or jumping. If you were at the top of a mountain and you get pushed off the mountain, you might die if it's
Mhm.
steep enough. If you're at the top of the mountain and you jump off the mountain, you can have a parachute.
Yep. That's right. That's the
So,
intentionality. That's
right.
because right now you have an opportunity to be intentional and thoughtful. And you just said something that made me realize, because I'm trying to figure out how to use the curve
Mhm,
to help leaders get people to want to jump, especially when they've experienced so much change. I think that's where we
mhm.
are right now too, is like, it's almost like people are overloaded with change.
Yeah,
And maybe that's one of the reasons they're holding on, because they're just like, I can't cope with any more new. I can't
right.
cope with being on the bottom of another curve because it just is so overwhelming. But I think what you just made me realize, there are now people in this intentional phase who can do all that looping now. There are people
Mhm,
who are very comfortable with being flexible across different dimensions based
mhm.
upon what it is they need to do, that they can maybe help those
Yeah,
that.
I love
So
that.
talk about that. I want to know about
Yeah,
this looping,
yeah,
because I think the experience is going to be different. And maybe that's one of the ways to get people to feel comfortable.
yeah. I think there are a few things that you can do here is number one, what you just said, where you can say to yourself, all right, this is there are some experts now who can help me do this. So I can make that decision to jump and I can now pack a parachute because there are people who can help me do this.
Mhm.
And so I know that I can't stay here. So part of it is raising the stakes and making it dangerous to stay where you are.
That, yes.
Because okay, so I know I just added one in this. So
Okay.
loss aversion theory says that we're more motivated by what we lose than by what we gain. So
Okay.
part of it is you can say, look, you can stay where you are, but there's actually this dragon that's coming after you and
Mm.
they're going to eat you if you try to stay where you are, or they're going to push you off. Or you can get in this parachute, which I know you've never skydived before, and that's really terrifying. But I've got this expert that can
Yep.
help you skydive. So you've now employed loss aversion in your favor. You've got a person who's an expert in doing S curve loops. So you're now getting to them, you're using their fear of loss in their favor. They're helping them find a guide who can help them move. And then the other thing that can happen is that you can give them the tools and say, I know you're going to do this new thing, and it's going to be really uncomfortable, but this is very, very normal. So
Yep.
all of those things can help them go to that new place. There was something else, but I don't remember what it was. It'll probably come back to
It'll
me.
come back. It'll come back to you. But
Yeah.
I think that point about leaders saying they're open, or CEOs saying they're open to transforming the organization and themselves, is hugely important, especially if they're able to articulate that loss aversion,
Yes.
right?
Hmm.
Because I think by articulating that, they can then shift the minds of those below them to say, we are not going back. And now you need to try to lead your people into that next curve. And we will support them. We will all be in this together. You yourself are going to be willing to be uncomfortable, because that's part of it, right? You as a
Hmm.
leader, a senior leader, need to be willing to be uncomfortable in operating in a new way, because I see so many who will say, this is funny. I want to know what you think about this.
Hmm.
They'll say, oh, I'm fine if people work flexibly. Now, I am probably going to be on site most of the time, but I don't. And I'm like, you know what? That's going to not, that
Hmm.
then you're staying over here and you're asking everybody else to jump over there. And people are going to be like, yeah, no. I mean, do you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. I mean, this goes back. I mean, if you think about it from a parenting standpoint, I had one psychologist say to me, when as a parent, we think that what we say to them matters, but what we say to our children is about 10%.
Mhm.
90% of it is all modeled.
Yep.
So if you want your people to jump to a new S curve and you don't, good luck with that.
Right. I
It just won't
know.
happen. It just won't happen. So I think that I guess that's the other thing is if you really want change to happen, you do it, but then be willing to talk about it. It's interesting, Callie. Not too long ago, I was doing a panel and we were talking about mental wellness, and it was really interesting to me because we were talking about the importance of leading, and really no one on the panel was willing to talk about their own journey around mental well-being.
Mm,
And I thought that was very interesting because if you're not willing to talk about it, then, and you're in a position of relative power, no one else is going to talk about it
yeah.
either. So you make it safe by saying, you know what? I don't know what work is going to look like.
Right.
I don't know.
Yep.
But what I do know, I mean, I don't know what the top of the mountain is going to look like, but what I do know is that we have to climb the mountain.
Hmm.
So we'll just go figure it out.
Yep.
And that makes us
Exactly.
all feel like, okay, let's do it. We can do it.
Yep.
We'll be okay. We'll figure it
Yep.
out.
That's exactly right. And I'm hoping that more leaders do that. What I've always said pre-pandemic, people chose this transformation. So the organizations we worked with were leaders who said we need to do that. They saw the future, they
Mhm,
made
mhm.
that leap, but they did exactly what you said. They said, I'm uncomfortable about this. I do not feel comfortable that I walk out of my office and I don't see everybody there every day, but I'm willing to learn how to operate differently
Yeah,
and be uncomfortable and maybe make some mistakes and learn from those mistakes. And it sets a whole new tone. And you just see people jump to it and say,
right,
let's all do this. Let's dive in together. So you're absolutely right.
right.
Um,
The other thing,
okay.
just one other quick
Yeah.
thought, Callie. One of the things that to remember is that the older we get, the more we can insulate ourselves from ever doing anything new.
Oh,
And
yes.
so it becomes a muscle that's actually quite weak. It's quite
Yes.
weak. And so
Yes.
that was again one of the gifts of the pandemic is we all got to exercise that muscle a little bit. But just if you're feeling like you're not good at doing all this new stuff, of course you're not, because you've gotten really and you put yourself in a position, and we all have, where we're not having to ever do anything new.
Yes.
And
That is so
so
true.
it's normal that you don't know how to do new things.
And I think I want to know what you think about this. Okay, so I have you, and I'm going to ask you all these questions. I
Yeah,
want to.
please. Yeah, let's do it.
So here's one of the other things I think is so exciting about this next evolution of the
Mhm,
way we work is maybe you're somebody who's not as comfortable using technology. Maybe
mhm.
there's a type of platform you're not comfortable using, or you don't know how to facilitate a hybrid meeting, or you don't know, but yet there are people in your organization that maybe do,
Yeah,
and they're power users. They're really good at this. And if you're able to be open to saying, I'm not 100% comfortable with this, I don't know how to do it, and allow that person to help you, it is so magical what can happen in terms of almost like co-mentoring each
mhm,
other through
mhm.
the parts of the curve we are individually not as comfortable with.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I have 2 thoughts on that, Callie. Number 1, I was just looking yesterday at some research that says that we actually like people that we help,
Yeah.
because if we're helping someone, in our brain, we think, well, I wouldn't help them if I didn't like them. And
Hmm.
so our brain starts to say, oh, I must like this person that I am helping.
Mm,
So it's really
interesting.
interesting. So we're uncomfortable asking for help, but and Heidi Grant has written a fantastic book called Reinforcements on How to Ask for Help.
Oh,
But
okay.
I thought that piece of research was really interesting, is that when I ask someone for help, they're actually more, and they help me, they're more likely to like me. The other thing that I've actually been thinking about as we've been building our business, is that when you find someone who is on a different curve from you and is really good at what they do, and they're able to contribute in a way that you had never even thought of contributing. You never had that idea. You didn't know how to do that. You literally never would have thought of it. And then they do it. It is a magical moment. And if you're willing to acknowledge that genius of theirs, nothing feels better
Yeah,
than being acknowledged for what you give. And so I think that's another thing to just be thinking about, is that willingness to say, I don't know how to do it. That opens the door for those magical moments.
absolutely. And helps us all move further up the curve
Mhm. Right.
more quickly and more effectively.
Mhm.
So, you also talk about something I think is very, very important. You talk about this period we're moving into as the Great Aspiration. We hear so much about the Great Resignation, and that is happening. Okay. But I think there's a way to frame this differently. And I like how you say, or you suggest that perhaps the way to shift to the Great Aspiration is if people are encouraged to move up or onto a new curve. And I thought you find interesting. We're in fact seeing that aspirational perspective in our work. So before any training we do, and the trainings we do obviously are helping managers and employees reimagine how, when, and where they work and execute their hybrid flexible model. We ask this question: how does this next level of flexible work transformation make you feel? And then we give them a range of responses, from, excited to, scared, and anything, all sorts of different options in between. So here's an interesting top 5 responses from over 1,000 managers and employees in one organization that we just trained. So we asked this question. Managers and employees had the same top 5. They were hopeful, curious, innovative, uncertain, okay, which is valid,
Yeah.
and energized. So I have to be honest, we've done this now probably 5 or 6 times, and we're consistently seeing the same thing. Now, remember, these are trainings where people are being invited to get the skills and tools to work together to jump to a new curve. So that's the context within which this question is being asked. But I did not think that of all the options they were given, that we would consistently see these same general 5 come up. I thought it would be more negative. I thought it would be less optimistic. And when you consistently hear people say, I am hopeful, I am curious, I am innovative, I'm uncertain, but I'm also energized, that realistic readiness is really important. So talk about why collectively being invited to work together to transform how you're operating, how you're getting your job done day to day, and why that would make a difference, and helping people feel positive in that Great Aspiration. So talk about the Great Aspiration and how we can get people to move there.
Yeah. So I have a lot of thoughts. First of all, that study is fascinating and really encouraging.
I agree. I think,
Really?
again, people, but to your point, they were given a parachute, right? I mean, just like what we're talking about now is a situation where they are essentially being given a parachute and saying, hey, let's do this together. But when that happens, they're saying something we're not hearing a lot about.
Right. Okay. So let me refer a second, and then you can help me fill in the blanks. So, so this idea of, as you said, there's a lot of resignation happening. And I think that sometimes people are tired.
Yeah.
And they need, but it's not that they're saying, I don't like my work necessarily. They're just, I'm on the mountain and I need to rest.
Yep.
I think more frequently, and you and I both in dancing around this, is that people, as a consequence of the pandemic, realized that they were far more resilient, far more adaptable than they imagined that they could be. And so now to come back to work and say, can you please just live your life exactly as you were 2 years ago? They're like,
no way, man.
No, I can't. They're saying,
no
literally,
way.
I cannot.
I literally can't.
Yeah. I cannot be that person anymore.
Yep.
And so they're saying they're resigning, but it's because they're aspiring. They're saying, psychologists have found that when you come through a period of severe stress, like a pandemic, there is tremendous growth. It's post-traumatic growth. And they are saying, I know how to grow. Maybe they don't know, but I want to grow, and I am ready to grow, and I must grow. And if I cannot grow here, then I will grow somewhere else. That's why it's the Great Aspiration. And so going to your study, I think if you think about the neuroscience, let's go to this idea of belonging. You look at self-determination theory. What does it say? And so in our book, we kind of play with the acronym a little bit and turn it to CAR. So you're going fast, you're accelerating. You feel competent, you feel autonomous, and you feel related. So when you say to people, hey, work is changing, we're going to jump off this mountain together, we're going to pack you a parachute, and we're going to give you the skills to do it. I'm going to help you feel competent. You're going to feel like you have control because you're choosing to jump, autonomy, and you feel related because you're doing it with people.
Yep.
So of course they feel hopeful.
Right.
Of course they feel curious. Of course they feel innovative. Yes, uncertain, but that means it's worth doing, because if it's certain, then that's the top of the curve. That's status quo. Why bother?
Right.
And then they feel energized. Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it.
Let's jump.
Because they want this different life. We're like, okay, yeah, maybe it was hard to homeschool my kid for 12 hours a day, but we have a different relationship now. And I like being around my child more, or whatever it is.
No, I'm going to give you a concrete example. Do you know I live probably a block and a half from the elementary school my kids went to? Now, we used to walk to school. And my kids are now in college and graduated. But I drive by that elementary school in the morning, and guess who is walking all the kids to school? The dads. All the dads. And that was not the case when my kids were young. Now, I had a lot of flexibility. I own my own company. So, I could do what, but these dads, and this has been for 2 years. And I'm thinking to myself, you know what? They're going to be willing to go in when they need to, but there better be a reason they're going into the city and not being able to periodically continue to walk their children to school.
Because I just got chills. Chills.
I mean, I should take a video of it. I've talked about it enough that I should really take a video.
You need to video it.
It's literally almost no moms. It's funny. I'm like, wow. So to your point,
because there's that precious little moment.
Little moment that if you're commuting in every day, again, you can't do, and they're not willing to give it up unless, yes, 2-3 days a week makes sense. But then they've got those 2 or 3 other days to continue to have that walk. So you're absolutely right. Those are important.
It's beautiful. Beautiful. Now, of course, we're talking about white collar workers.
Right.
Professional workers.
Yes.
Because we can't solve all problems, but this is a problem that you can solve. So this is the one you're focused on.
Well, it's interesting you say that. Believe it or not, it's not, it doesn't just have to be white collar workers. And this is why we can't just talk about remote work. Okay. This is why if there's one thing I do in this next phase is I get us to truly transition over to flexibility and a flexible operating model, because I've seen situations where call centers, they were able to change the way they assign different times that people can work in different shifts, so it can support their but again, it's about being flexible in how you traditionally have scheduled people in the call center, which tends to be very directed by how long you've been there and seniority, and that depends if you can work during the day or night. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that way, but you have to be flexible in how you think about it. And also a lot of retail workers and even restaurant workers, they had too much flexibility. So it really is about a consistency in their schedules. And the reason they had that too much flexibility is there were all of these computer programs that would monitor to like the minute the volume of customers, and then they send people home, or they would tell you at the last minute, you don't have a shift. And that doesn't work either. So again, it's this looking at high performance, intentional flexibility that makes sense for the job, right? And knowing that it starts with what do you do, and then how, when, and where do you do it best, and making sure you are adapting to that reality. So
I have to give you an example that I think will make you happy. So I live in Lexington, Virginia, which is a fairly small, pretty rural community. And there's a local restaurant that I went to last Saturday called The Palms. And I noticed on the front door, they said, we've changed our work hours to accommodate our wait staff. So they're not open as many hours. And I talked to the manager and I said, so what's the thought process? And he said, our people just said, we can't work these many hours. And he said, we don't have the same number of workers. So we're just accommodating what they can do. And I thought, that's terrific.
But they jumped to a new curve.
They did.
They jumped to a new curve. I mean, there's a lot of discomfort there because they had a way of doing it
Mhm.
that was one way, and now
Right.
it's got to be another way,
Right.
and that's
And
uncomfortable.
the workers probably pushed pretty hard.
But that's the example that I was talking about. I don't know if we were taping then, but when I was saying this is interesting, this time pre-pandemic, it was usually a leader that saw the future and drove the change,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Now a lot of this is being driven by employees saying we're not going to do this anymore. So now it's almost like you have to have the leader get comfortable and say, you know what, we need to do this differently.
Mhm.
And they're willing to make the change too, so that
Yeah.
everybody is willing to go over to that new curve.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a very helpful framework to understand how to make this next transition and understand where you are as a leader,
Mhm.
and also as a leader understand where your people are on this
Right.
curve. And one example I would use is people have to talk about young people. Like, young people want to work remotely. Actually, they don't. People want to have a combination of on-site and remote that makes sense for their jobs. Does that make so? It's almost
Yeah.
like, hey, if it makes sense for me to be here, and yeah, I like collaborating with people. I love being in the office with people. It gets me exposed to people. I meet new individuals. I learn things. But if I can do a spreadsheet at home and do it faster, I'd rather have the flexibility
Mm.
to do that.
Mhm.
So they are kind of up the curve, like they are, but then you may have again some of these people that I don't want to go. I want to go back to what we had. I want to go. How is it just allows a leader to step back and say, where are all these different people on the curve,
Right.
right?
Right.
And
Right.
how do I move us forward? So if you had one piece of advice for a
Mhm.
leader who
Mhm.
wanted to support this great aspiration, and the
Mhm.
reason I shared that case study is that it is real. What Whitney is
Yeah.
talking about is true and real. If we
Mhm.
give people the tools, if we give them that parachute, if we invite them to come along, it happens. You can
Mhm.
get there. So where do they begin with their workforce? What would you advise?
Yeah, so I think a good starting place is, well, with yourself
Yeah,
and
exactly.
understand, all right, so where am I when I think about this whole process of I have certain things that my employer needs me to get done. And what's the best way for me to get this done? Do I need to be in the office a couple days a week? Do I need to be here, 5 days a week? Do I need to be here? Not at all, whatever that is. And where am I in terms of my willingness to do this? Am I at the launch point where I'm like, oh, I really don't want to do this? Or am I kind of just about like, okay, yeah, I'm doing this? Or am I in mastery and ready to kind of bring other people along? Then I would look at everybody on your team and just say, okay, let me look at my team. What does the job require of them? um how often do we need to be in person and to collaborate? How important is it they are in the office and meeting people so that they can have promotion and other opportunities to meet people? um and is it, to what extent does it behoove them to be out of the office, and where are they from a mindset standpoint? And so that would be my one piece of advice, is just figure out where they are, meet them where they are. And this is important, I think when we talk about this we sometimes overlook this, is while you are allowing them to structure how they work and when they work and where they work, in order for this to work for you and for the organization, you need to be really, really, really clear about what success looks like.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yep.
And that's hard because
Yep.
we don't like to be clear about what success looks like, because that might mean we have to confront people, and we don't
Yep.
like to do that. But if you're willing to have expectations and be clear about what outcomes you need, then you can say, go do whatever you want.
Yep.
Got to do this, but you can do whatever you want. So, what I
Yep.
would say is, yeah, figure out where everybody is on the S curve, but this isn't a free for all. Do whatever you
No.
want.
Yep.
Have the expectations. It's a both and.
It's a both and that is where that parachute, that training, that support, that guidance comes into play, because I don't think we were really that great about defining success even before the pandemic. And
No,
so now a lot of this is forcing a lot of things that were overlooked that were
right. We
very
thought we were.
important.
We could pretend we were because we saw them.
Exactly.
But now that we don't see them, we can't pretend that we are anymore.
Exactly. Okay. So you have me thinking now about um, senior leaders,
Mhm.
leaders who had mastery in the old world, okay,
Mhm.
who
Mhm.
felt they understood how to lead, because leading in a flexible organization is very different. Okay, you
Mhm.
need, and I love, you talk a lot about developing your people, and
Right.
this is one of the things I think is really important. People are like, well, how do we develop people? Well, you have to first determine what the new operating model is to understand what the competencies are to be able to develop people to be
Mhm.
successful in that new way of operating.
Mhm.
Because as a leader, there's more intentionality that has to go into this. Like,
Yeah.
you have to be willing to say, all right, who's am I responsible for, right?
Right.
Who do I want to get to know? How do I want to encourage them and give them opportunities? But I might not be seeing them every day. How do I connect with them virtually? How do I make sure I'm planning to be with them in the same physical space if this is something
Mhm.
that's somebody I want to get to know? How do I encourage them to be reaching out to me, which could be very new?
Mhm.
So, how do you get a senior leader who is in mastery, who likes how that feels, to know that if they go down to back to the beginning of the curve, that's just as important for them as a leader in order to build this organization of the
Mhm.
future?
Mhm.
How do you help them understand that?
Mm.
Because it's a
That's
really
it's a
different way of
small
being,
it's a small question, but it's a really big question all at the same time.
right?
Um, I think that eh, so if you're that person's manager, I think it comes back to, let's say you're the manager and you the manager first of all have to decide, what mountain are we climbing? Like, what does success look like? Because you
Mhm.
just described this and it's like part of me says, well, but what are you describing actually? And so then we're going to this process of, let's say I'm the manager and I think, all right, I have determined that for our organization, we need to be here 3 days a week and 2 days or remote, or whenever we have whatever it is. Let's just do that because it's simple. I need to, as a manager, be able to articulate that in a way that the person who works for me understands it well enough that they can articulate it. And so
Yep.
there's an ability and a willingness to communicate, which is very difficult,
Mhm.
but that's part of what leadership is there's this mountain and we're going to go climb it, and let's go climb this together. It's back to the belonging and the inclusion
Yep.
piece.
Yep. And also, I think, and I'm pre-verbal on this, so I'm asking you a question I'm a little pre-verbal on, but
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. Oh, I love
really,
that expression.
I'm
Pre-verbal.
seeing it, and I'm trying to put words around it because it's
Yeah.
really important
Okay.
in that, to your point, articulating what that mountain is,
Mhm.
but it may not be the mountain you came from. Does that make
Right.
sense as a
Right.
leader? Like,
Mhm.
all the things that got you to mastery may not be the things that get this person that you're trying to develop to mastery. It's a
Right.
different mountain than
Right.
you
Yes.
came from, right? As the so
Yeah.
it's a tough place for leaders, because when you were coming up the mountain to mastery, and I keep seeing this, what you always hear, and when you hear leaders saying, well, we are an apprenticeship culture where we
Mhm.
have to have people here,
Mhm.
and that's how you learn, and there is an aspect of that that is still very true,
Yep.
for sure, but maybe not exactly the way that
Mhm.
apprenticeship was carried out when you were going up the curve.
Yeah, it's such a great question. I've thought about this, and I think that anybody who's probably, I don't know, in their 40s, def in their 40s, probably definitely 50s and 60s, is you sometimes hear this, well, they're not paying their dues. Like,
Right.
this is how we did it,
Right.
right?
Yes.
Well, when I was 25, I
Yep.
worked 90 hours a week.
Exactly.
And
Yes.
they don't want to work at 90 hours a week. They are lazy. Or one could
Yes.
argue, well, they're just not dumb like you were because you worked 95 hours a week. I mean, And so part of this process is there's two pieces to it, I think. And I'm a little pre-verbal as well.
I
love
know
that
I
expression.
really appreciate you doing this with me because I think it's important. I really
Yeah,
do. And I think your curve is a great way to kind of understand it.
Yeah.
So thank
Yeah.
you for.
Yeah. So I think there's some element of our willingness to not be resentful of
Totally.
people who are younger
Yep.
and say, okay, you know what? I did work 80 hours a week and that's the world as I know it. And those are choices that I made and you don't want to. And you know what? You get to choose that. Now, we still have things we need to get
We
done.
need to do. Exactly. Like there's still valid
So-
parts of this. Like, and you were in investment banking, and I hear this
That's
with
right.
investment banking.
Oh, yeah.
Like no investment banker is saying, I'm not going to work 3 days straight. If we have a deal, we have to get out.
No.
Nobody, they're not saying that. What they're saying is when that deal's over, I'm not sitting here. Why am I
Right.
sitting here in this office? Because that's what I did. I sat
Right.
here.
That's
It's
right.
like, well, I don't want to do that. Call me back. I'll be right
Yeah.
back if you need me again.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So what that is, that piece of it is to not be resentful.
Yeah.
And not be entitled of like, well, you have to do it because I did it. Because that's just not useful. Because they're
Yep.
saying, I want a different life. So that's the first thing.
And we've proven we can do that. The last
Right.
2 years have proven we can do that differently.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is that even though you may not know how to do the job that your people need to do, or how to work in a way that your people need to work, you have collected some skills because you're older and more seasoned,
Yep.
called resilience, called adaptability, and so this is that place where you need to say to yourself, I don't know how to do this, but I have all these soft skills that will help me do this. And so back to this thing I said earlier is when you get older, you can say, well, I don't need to do anything new because I can insulate myself from everything. The irony of it is you actually have that muscle, which you do know how to do new things and you can help people do them. So I think there's an element of allowing people and not being resentful, number one. And then there's the other element of what are your soft skills? Because you can help people adapt. And how are you going to help them do that?
And I think bringing all that to the table is what can help shift to this great aspiration in your organization. People do not have to quit. That's the like, bring all of what you just described, an openness and understanding we can do things differently, all those soft skills, even if as you develop your people to this new flexible next iteration of the way we work, invite them into the process, give them the skills and the tools, even though you don't know exactly what that is yourself. And I think you can switch it. I think you can switch it from this great resignation to that great aspiration that you so validly have pointed out. And we are seeing over and over again.
And some people are doing it and they will win.
Yes, they will win. They will win. Because here's the thing, anybody you hire in is going to want the very same thing that you are not inviting your people into the process to create.
Right.
So you're going to ultimately get there, but have to do it with people who actually don't know their jobs. So, then that's like a whole other level of low end of the curve. Then you don't even have people who have mastery of their jobs.
Right.
Jumping on to the now we have to transform work curve. Right.
Yeah, right.
So it's just,
the domain and exactly.
Right. All right. See, this is why I wanted to talk to you about this, because I knew that your superpower would help me articulate this thing I'm pre-verbal on, but
good.
Yes.
So did you figure it out?
I did. It's what you just said, which is, don't be resentful. Don't want to hold on to the way you did something, knowing that if you are to be open to inviting everybody in to now going to the next way of how we can do things. Bringing all that you know about how the business works. Like I do believe in an apprenticeship environment, it does help to be together. Yeah. And it does.
I just thought of something that I think is really important in this conversation. I was speaking to Richie Norton, who's a colleague the other day, and we were talking about Bob Proctor.
Oh my gosh, I know.
Who just passed away.
Oh, what a wonderful
man. Yeah, he really was. And so for those of you who don't know, human potential movement, basically Tony Robbins, pre generation prior to Tony Robbins. And one of the things I was talking about how he'd been such a wonderful mentor to me. He was 86, 87 years old. And Richie said to me, you know, Whitney, one of the reasons he stayed relevant is because he found ways to help people.
Yep.
And so for senior leaders who are saying, I don't know, there's all this uncertainty, I'm afraid I'm going to lose my job. Now,
Yep.
I don't want to dismiss the fact that there's ageism,
Mm-hmm.
but if you want to stay relevant, you figure out a way to help people up the curve, because there will always be room in the room in the room
Room in
for
the room.
people who help.
Yes, this is true. And pre-pandemic, some of the most transformative leaders that we worked with were people actually who were much older and were able to use all that political capital
Mhm.
and all of that soft skills knowledge and
Mhm.
respect that they had for their people to navigate that new normal, to pull in the new ways things needed to be done, but also keeping hold of the things that still mattered the way work had been done before. And that's just as important.
That's
We
an
don't have to
S-curve
throw
loop.
it. We don't have to throw it all out. I mean,
No.
it's the way things were done. There are parts of that still are valid that have to be part of the decision making and the reimagining,
Mhm.
and you can play that role. So again, thank you for helping
Yeah,
me.
that's an
Yeah.
S-curve loop, Cali.
That is an S-curve loop. That is so
Mhm.
true. So all of you who are listening can now see why I so deeply value the wisdom and the work of my dear friend, Whitney Johnson. So Whitney, you are the best. And I
Aw.
just cannot encourage people enough to get this book, Smart Growth, especially as you personally, and then you as a leader have to navigate what is going to be the next evolution in the flexible, dynamic way we operate as organizations and as people. We are not going back, but we do have to evolve from this pandemic response, which was crisis driven. It was not thoughtful. It was not intentional. And now we've got to together in a really, thoughtful, strategic way, jump to this next curve together. And Whitney's wisdom can help us do that. So thank you. So anything else? Where can people reach you? What's the most current thing you're doing you'd like to share with people? Anything you'd like to let us know?
Well, you can read the book, Smart Growth. You can buy it wherever books are sold. Because you're doing a podcast, you can go listen to our podcast, Disrupt Yourself. Callie's been on the podcast.
Yes.
And then we have a newsletter, whitneyjohnson.com/newsletter you can sign up for, which is basically me talking about all the mistakes that I make as I'm trying to grow. So if you want a little bit of that, you can read the newsletter.
It's one of my favorite newsletters, and the Disrupt Yourself podcast is one of my favorite podcasts because you talk to all these people and they share their stories about how they moved up the S curve of learning, and it really is very inspirational, and you inspire me, my friend. So thank you.
Thank you, Callie.
All right. Take care. And thanks, everybody. And next time I will bring to you even more of my favorite thought leaders who are also reimagining how and where we work and live today, now, and next. Thanks so much.